"We're alone," said the Apache woman, her tone flat as the dust that wrapped the desert. "Let's do what's necessary." The wind hit Clearwater Station like a whip, driving red sand through every crack of the wooden platform. When the train screeched to a halt, Abel Harkin didn't move. He stood beneath the warped awning, hat low, the afternoon sun carving hard shadows into his weathered face. Then she appeared, barefoot, wrapped in a torn, gray blanket, stepping down from the last car as if she carried the weight of a whole world on her back. Her eyes, dark as wet obsidian, caught the light. The crowd murmured. Someone spat in the dust. Abel walked forward, boots thudding against the boards. He reached for the small sack in her hands. His voice came out low, steady. "Let's go." She hesitated, then gave a single nod. As they turned away, a folded note slipped into Abel's palm. The handwriting was unmistakable. Silas Gant. By the time he read the first line, his jaw had turned to stone. The road to Dry Willow Creek stretched under a sky bleached white by heat. Dust clung to the wagon wheels, his boots, even his thoughts. Abel held the reins loosely as the horse trudged forward. Beside him, the Apache woman sat straight-backed, her gaze fixed on the horizon like she could will herself somewhere else. The San Simon Valley lay silent and flat, grass dying in the glare. The air smelled of mesquite and old iron. Years ago, soldiers had ridden through these plains under banners of peace and left only smoke and ashes behind. Abel had been one of them. By sundown, his small homestead came into view, a sagging cabin beside a dry creek bed, one horse, two fences half fallen. It wasn't much, but it was the only patch of earth where no one asked who he used to be. Inside, the air held the scent of wood smoke and loneliness. Abel set down her small bundle and motioned to the loft. "You can stay up there," he said quietly. "You don't want to do what's necessary?" she asked, her voice steady but bitter. "Get some rest," he replied and walked away. She didn't move, just watched him with the stillness of a wild creature too often cornered. He would learn her name later. Nita, meaning little one with heart. Her face was sharp from hunger, her dark hair tangled by wind. A blue bead hung from her neck, the last remnant of another life. Abel poured water from a clay jug, cool and clean against his cracked palms. Across the room, Nita finally spoke, her voice hoarse from dust. "What did the letter say?" Abel glanced at the folded page on the table, ink blurred by sweat and sun. "Nothing that matters," he said after a moment, though the words still burned inside him, a cruel message from a man who wanted to mock him for surviving the war. Outside, cicadas began their evening cry, and the dry wind carried the scent of rain that would never fall. Night came quickly. The desert cooled but did not rest. Wind scraped against the cabin walls like whispers. Inside, the lamp burned low, throwing long shadows across the wooden floor. Abel sat at the table, untouched beans cooling on his plate. Near the hearth, Nita crouched beside the fire, coaxing flame from reluctant logs. Her movements were deliberate, careful, the way someone learns after too much pain. "You can use the bed," Abel offered after a while. "The loft gets hot." "I'll stay near the fire," she said without looking up. Her English was slow, shaped by her mother tongue, but her tone carried quiet defiance. Silence stretched between them, heavy as dust. Abel rose, stepped to the door, and looked into the endless dark. Coyotes called somewhere beyond the ridge. He wondered if she heard that sound differently, if it meant home to her. When he turned back, Nita's eyes were fixed on the letter. "You hide words," she said. "It's not for you. But it speaks of me." Abel stiffened. He took the paper, slid it into his coat. It's finished. Nita's lips pressed thin. She wrapped the blanket tighter. White men always say that, she murmured. Finished. Her tone wasn't angry, just tired. It hit him harder than any insult. He wanted to tell her he wasn't like the others, that he hadn't asked for this, that he'd buried his rifle years ago. But words meant nothing here. He sat again, the chair creaking under his weight. You have a name? She hesitated, then said, Nita. He nodded. Abel. The fire popped softly between them. For a long while, neither spoke. Yet the silence felt changed, less sharp, more like an uneasy truce. Outside, thunder rolled far off, too distant to bring rain. When Abel finally rose to douse the lamp, he looked toward her one last time. Nita's eyes were open, watching the dying firelight. No fear, only the same quiet vigilance he carried himself. He lay awake long after, listening to the desert breathe. For the first time in years, that sound didn't make him feel alone. Days blurred together under the sun. Heat. Silence. But something subtle began to shift at Dry Willow Creek. The house no longer felt hollow. It carried sound, the scrape of a bucket, the clang of a pot, the soft murmur of two people learning to live beside each other. Nita rose before dawn, swept the floor, fed the horse, carried water from the well. Her bare feet left no sound on the packed earth. Abel worked the corral, fixing fence posts under a sky white with heat. They rarely spoke, but when they passed each other, they shared small nods, simple gestures that said, I see you. You're here. One morning, Abel found her at the pump, muttering an Apache as the handle jammed. He stepped behind her, pressed down once. The pump wheezed, then spat a burst of cold water over their hands. Nita gasped, startled. Water ran down their wrists, glinting in the sun. You've got to twist it first, he said with a faint smile. She smiled back. Small, but real. In the sweltering afternoons, when even the cicadas gave up, Nita sat on the porch mending a torn shirt, while Abel read from old newspapers, stumbling over faded words. She didn't understand much, but she liked his voice. Rough, low, steady as a heartbeat. Sometimes she'd ask about the words she heard often. Freedom, promise, peace. He never had easy answers. Once she asked, You fought at Fort Bowie? He froze, paper half folded. Yes. You killed my people? He met her eyes. Yes, no excuses, no stories, just truth. She nodded and looked away. But that night, when she laid out her blanket, she placed it closer to the fire, closer to him. Weeks passed. The town whispered of the soldier and the Apache woman. One morning, Clyde Barker, the deputy, rode up spitting dust. Folks up top don't like seeing her free, he warned. Abel stood in the doorway, hand resting near his holster but voice calm. She works for me. She's under my roof, under my word. Barker sneered. Word of a man like you don't count for much. Abel's eyes darkened. Then it'll have to count for more. The deputy left without another word. Nita watched from the porch, her hands tight around the railing. That night, she left a bundle of dried sage by his door. For strength, she said simply. Nita watched from the porch, her fingers tight around the railing. That night she left a small bundle of dried sage at Abel's door. For strength, she said simply. Little by little, life began to take shape again. She learned to grind grain using his old millstone, and he learned the desert plants from her tongue. Kahi for yucca, bidzil for strength. In the evenings, she sang softly while she worked, songs without words that made the air itself gentler. Then came the night of the rain. The sky had been growling for days, clouds swollen with dust and thunder. They were fixing the corral when the wind shifted, carrying the scent of wet earth. Nita tilted her face upward, eyes closed, as the first drop struck her skin. "Rain," she whispered, almost laughing. Abel leaned against the post, watching her. "Haven't seen it in months." "It comes when the heart remembers how to call it," she said. When the downpour finally broke, it came wild and sudden. Water roared off the roof, gushed through the gutters, soaked the yard. Nita stepped barefoot into it, arms open, spinning beneath the storm. Her hair clung to her cheeks, her laughter rising above the thunder. Abel hesitated in the doorway, then stepped out too, letting the rain wash over his face like redemption. For a long while, they didn't speak. They just stood there, two silhouettes blurred by silver rain. When he finally looked at her, she smiled through the curtain of water. "You have rain now," she said. He met her gaze, voice low. "No," he murmured. "We have rain." That night, the world felt clean again. The roof dripped softly, and the scent of wet cedar filled the cabin. Abel poured a tin cup of coffee and set it before her. She took it carefully, her fingers trembling from the chill. "Why do you live out here alone?" she asked. He stared into the dark liquid. "I came back from the war with too many ghosts," he said. "This was the farthest place I could find." Nita nodded slowly. "Ghosts follow," she said, "even into the desert." Her words weren't a warning, but an understanding. In the days that followed, the air turned cooler. Something unspoken hung between them. Not romance, not yet, but a quiet belonging, like two wounds learning to heal side by side. Abel found himself waiting for her laughter, listening for her light steps on the porch. Nita began humming as she worked, sometimes leaving small bundles of herbs near his tools. "For luck," she said. One evening, he found her standing near the cottonwoods, staring west, where the sunset burned red through the dust. "That mountain," she said softly. "My mother sang there, before the soldiers came." Abel followed her gaze, a familiar ache tightening in his chest. "I'm sorry," he said. Nita turned toward him, her face unreadable. "Sorry is only a word," she said. "But you build new things." He said nothing. But later that night, before blowing out the lamp, he opened the drawer, took out the tarnished badge buried beneath old rags, turned it once in his hand, then set it down for good. From that day on, there was no master or servant at Dry Willow Creek. Only two souls bound by work, silence, and the fragile peace that comes not from asking forgiveness, but from living as if it might still be found. Each morning, Abel would find a clay bowl of cool water by the door, a faint trace of sage drifting above it. Nita never said why she left it there, and he never asked. Some things, in that valley of red dust and regret, didn't need words. The days after the rain came golden and still, as if the desert had drawn a long breath. The fields shimmered faintly green, and the scent of wet sage lingered in the air. Nita hummed as she worked, and Abel found himself listening more than he meant to. He began to think foolishly, that perhaps peace might last. But peace in the desert was always borrowed time. That afternoon, while sweeping the kitchen, Nita noticed a drawer slightly ajar. Inside, beneath a pile of worn shirts, a corner of yellowed paper peeked out. She pulled it free, smoothing the creases. The writing was English, but the wax seal, a stamped eagle, made her blood run cold. The army. Fort Bowie. Abel came in from the yard just as she was staring at the page. "What are you doing?" he snapped. Her head jerked up. "It has your name." He crossed the room in 2 strides, snatching the paper from her hand. "You shouldn't touch things that aren't yours." Her voice shook, though her eyes didn't. "Then tell me, who sent it?" "It's nothing." "It is something. I know this mark. It belongs to soldiers." "Drop it, Nita." But she didn't. She stepped closer, grabbing his sleeve. "Tell me." The paper crumpled between them. For a long moment, Abel's jaw clenched like stone. Then, quietly, "It's from Silas Gant, my former captain." Her breath caught. "Your friend?" "Once," he said, voice dry, bitter. He hesitated, then confessed. The silence between them drawn tight like wire. "He sent you, called you a gift, a joke meant to shame me." Nita's face went pale. "A gift?" The word cut her tongue like glass. "He said I could prove I still had mercy," Abel muttered. "That maybe if I kept you alive, I'd earn something back." Her chest rose, unsteady. "So I am your penance?" He looked up, guilt carving deep lines in his face. "No, you were never that." But she was already stepping back, her voice raw. "All this time, you knew." Then she turned and fled into the evening light, the door slamming behind her. Abel stood frozen, the letter crushed in his hand. He listened to the sound of her footsteps fading into the open valley. By the time he reached the barn, she was gone. The wind had risen again, whipping red dust through the mesquite. He saddled his horse with shaking hands and rode into the night. The storm broke without warning, sheets of dust, low thunder rolling over the Chiricahua foothills. Each gust tore at his eyes, his throat. Still he pressed on, shouting her name into the wind. "Nita." No answer. Only the echo of his guilt bouncing off the canyon walls. Hours later, through the veil of the storm, he spotted a small figure crouched by the dry creek bed. She was soaked in grit, clutching something tight to her chest. When he dismounted, he saw it. The letter, crumpled, nearly torn apart. "Nita," he rasped, "you'll die out here." She didn't look up. "Why do you care?" Nita whispered, her voice sharp beneath the storm. "Maybe I should," Abel said softly, kneeling beside her. He reached toward her shoulder, but she flinched back. "Don't," she hissed. Her eyes burned through the dark. "I thought you saw me, not just a thing they threw away." A rumble of dry thunder cracked across the sky. Abel shut his eyes. "I did," he said. "I do." "That letter, what he meant, it doesn't define this." "Then what is this?" Her voice trembled. "You keep me because you pity me." He shook his head, rain or maybe tears running down his cheeks. "No, because if I let them take you back, they'll break you again, and I can't stomach another soul buried in the name of mercy." She stared at him, breathing uneven. "You think I need saving?" "No." His voice dropped to a whisper. "I think I need forgiving." For a long heartbeat, they didn't move. The wind screamed through the canyon like a wounded animal. Then, slowly, Nita's fingers loosened. The letter slipped from her hand, caught in the storm. It whirled once in the air, then vanished into the dust. "Forgiveness isn't mine to give," she said, voice like wind over stone. "But you speak truth." Abel bowed his head. "That's all I've got left." Lightning split the sky, casting their shadows long across the rocks. Nita looked at him, really looked, and saw not a soldier, not a threat, but a man worn thin from fighting ghosts that refused to stay buried. Something inside her loosened. Her hand, still trembling, brushed his cheek. "Then we're both lost things," she murmured. "And lost things," she added, "can walk together." He laid his hand gently over hers, held it there. Just a moment. Then another. The storm around them began to soften, the wind falling to a tired sigh. By dawn, they were riding side by side toward Dry Willow Creek. The desert smelled like dust and renewal. They didn't speak. The silence said enough. As they reached the cabin, Abel dismounted first and turned to help her down. Nita paused, then took his hand. Her palm was rough, cold, but alive. "You could have left me," she said. "I did once," he replied quietly. "I won't again." Behind them, the sky glowed with pale gold. The letter that nearly tore them apart was gone now, buried under miles of red sand. But in its place, something fragile as morning light had been born. The days that followed were quiet, heavy with the strange calm that comes after truth is spoken. The sky softened. The wind cooled. Abel repaired the fence. Nita hung herbs by the window to dry. They didn't speak of that night by the creek. They didn't have to. What stood between them now was not silence, but roots, deep and steady, finding water beneath cracked earth. Then, one afternoon, the sound of hooves shattered the stillness. 3 riders crested the ridge, black silhouettes against a pale sky. At their head rode Silas Gant. His blue coat was dust-streaked, but his smile remained untouched by time. Abel's gut tightened. He'd known this day would come. "Harkin!" Gant called out, reining up before the cabin. "Heard you built yourself a little paradise out here. Figured I'd ride out and see the miracle." Nita stood in the doorway, her fingers gripping the frame. That voice, she knew it. The same cold laugh that had echoed across the burning fields of her past. Abel stepped forward, shotgun draped across his arm. "You're not welcome here." Gant dismounted slowly, boots crunching the dry earth. "Don't be rude, old friend. I came to collect what belongs to the government. That girl's San Carlos property." "She belongs nowhere but where she chooses," Abel said, calm but cold. Gant's grin widened. "You've gone soft, Harkin. Always figured your sympathy for savages would be your undoing." His hand brushed the butt of his pistol. "Now step aside." For a heartbeat, the world held still. Then, the cabin door creaked open. Nita stepped out. Her chin lifted. The wind tugged her hair free. Her eyes burned dark and fierce. "I am not property," she said. "Not of soldiers, not of any man." Gant chuckled, the sound brittle. "You hear that, Harkin? She talks now." Abel didn't blink. His voice came steady. "Turn around, Captain. You'll find no allies here." The 2 riders behind Gant shifted in their saddles, uneasy. From beyond the hills, figures began to appear. Men from Clearwater, faces Abel once traded with. A few shouldered rifles. Gus McCready called out from the ridge. "You heard him, Gant. The war's over. Let the girl be." Gant's smirk faltered. His eyes flicked between Abel and the growing crowd. At last, he spat into the dust. "You'll regret this, Harkin." "Maybe," Abel said, "but not tonight." Gant mounted up, wheeled his horse, and rode off. His men followed. The sound of hooves faded into the desert wind. Silence returned. The townsfolk lingered for a breath, then tipped their hats to Abel and turned home. No one spoke of it. But something had changed in Clearwater. The man they once called a coward now stood for something more. Inside the cabin, Nita sat near the fire. Her hands trembled, though she tried to hide it. Abel poured water into a cup and handed it to her. "You're safe now." She shook her head gently. "No one is safe forever. But today, I am free." He crouched beside her, searching her face. "You knew him?" he said quietly. Her voice came distant, flat. "Not him, but men like him." "Not him," Nita said softly, "but men like him." Her voice didn't shake. "They came to our village when I was 15. My mother was a healer. She sang to the sick. They said she was hiding warriors." She stared into the fire, unmoving. "They burned everything. I ran. When they caught me, they passed me from one camp to the next until no one remembered my name." Her eyes glistened in the lamplight, but her tone held firm. "I stopped wanting to live a long time ago. I thought the desert would take me. But then you—" She looked up, meeting Abel's eyes. "You didn't look at me with pity. You looked at me like I was still human." She paused. "That was enough to help me remember who I was." Abel's throat tightened. "You shouldn't thank me for that." "I'm not thanking," she said simply. "I'm living." A faint smile tugged at his mouth, but it didn't last. The cough came, sharp, deep, tearing through his chest. The old wound had reopened. Fever followed. That night, he lay shivering under sweat-soaked sheets while Nita sat beside him, grinding herbs, whispering prayers in her native tongue. The scent of sage filled the cabin. When he stirred awake, she was there, cool cloth in hand, wiping his brow. Outside, the sky had turned pearl gray. Mourning doves cooed through the half-open window. "You stayed," he murmured. She gave him a faint smile. "You didn't tell me to leave." He tried to sit up, winced. "You saved me." She touched his hand, soft as breath. "No, we save each other. Again and again. That's how people live." For a long time they sat in silence. The fire burned low. Then Nita spoke again, almost to herself. "There was a time I hated every white face I saw. I thought the earth would never give me peace." She glanced towards the window. "But maybe peace doesn't come from forgetting. Maybe it comes from choosing to stay." Abel looked at her then. Really looked. The curve of her shoulders, the small scars at her wrists, the calm strength in her eyes. He realized the redemption he'd been chasing had already come. Quiet, undeserved, and wordless. "Nita," he said gently, "you could still go. Find your people, if any remain." She shook her head. "Home isn't always where we're born. Sometimes it's the place that lets us breathe again." He didn't argue, just reached for her hand. And this time, she didn't pull away. The sun rose over the hills, painting the desert in pale gold. For the first time in memory, the light didn't hurt. Outside, the wind carried the faint smell of rain. Inside, two hearts, scarred and stubborn, began to learn the quiet rhythm of staying. Autumn crept softly across San Simon Valley. The days still held warmth, but the light turned golden. Dry Willow Creek trickled again, its sound light, steady, alive. Weeks passed since Silas Gant's visit. No one came looking again. In Clearwater, the name Harkin stopped drawing whispers. Folks nodded when they passed Abel at the trading post, even tipped their hats to the dark-haired woman at his side. Some said the soldier had found peace. Others said the Apache girl had tamed a ghost. No one realized just how close both were to the truth. Life settled into rhythm. Each morning, Nita ground grain for bread while Abel mended fences or tended to the mare. When the sun reached high, they'd share a quiet meal beneath the old oak by the well. Sometimes they laughed, low, surprised, almost unsteady, like folks relearning how. The land changed too. Where dust once ruled, green began to push through. Barley sprouted near the trough. Young cottonwoods took root where Abel had planted with blistered hands. Nita's herb garden bloomed along the fence line, sage, juke, and desert lavender. The air smelled sweet, the scent clinging to their clothes. One morning, Abel found her kneeling by the plants, humming softly. "Your medicine garden's taken over my field," he said, leaning on a fence post. She smiled without looking up. "Maybe your field needed healing too," he chuckled, shaking his head. "You're probably right." That night, they sat side by side on the porch, watching lightning flicker far in the distance. After a long silence, Nita spoke. "When I was little, my mother said thunder is the sky remembering what it's lost." She paused, then added, "But sometimes, I think it's also remembering what it still has." Abel turned the thought over like a coin. He always did when she spoke. "Maybe that's true for people too." She nodded gently. "You still have ghosts?" He looked out across the dark plain. "Always," he said, "but they don't speak so loud anymore." The porch creaked under them. Crickets hummed in the brush. Then, almost shy, Nita whispered, "Abel, I want to stay." He turned to her, startled not because he hadn't wished for it, but because hearing it out loud felt like sunlight after too long in the dark. "Then stay," he said simply. The weeks blurred into a steady pulse of rebuilding. They worked side by side, patching the barn roof, setting new posts, clearing dead brush. Nita carried her share without complaint. Her small frame was steady as any ranch hand. When she tired, Abel fetched water. When he stumbled, she laughed and offered her hand. There were no big declarations, no promises spoken aloud. Just two people learning the quiet, unspoken language of trust. No promises, just two people learning the quiet language of trust. Then, one evening, as the air turned crisp and the sky burned copper, Abel called Nita out to the oak by the well. The wind carried the mingled scent of sage and distant rain. He held a carving knife and a small chisel. "Figured this old tree could use a few words," he said, placing his hand against the rough bark. Slowly, carefully, he began to carve. Nita stood beside him, watching every motion of his hands as letters took shape. Home, built by two hearts. Abel stepped back and brushed dust from the grooves. "It ain't poetry," he muttered, almost shy. Nita smiled. Her voice was soft. "It's truth." She placed her hand beside his on the bark. Their fingers touched, calloused, scarred, but warm. Above them, the oak swayed in the breeze, shedding a few dry leaves like quiet blessings. "I used to think home was gone," Nita whispered, "that nothing would ever grow again where they burned my village." She paused, eyes drifting toward the field where barley danced in the wind. "But maybe home isn't something you find. Maybe it's something you build, with another soul." Abel's voice came low, rough. "I thought I was done building anything, but you proved me wrong." She looked up at him, her eyes glowing in the fading light. "You gave me a reason to live. That's more than any man's ever given me." He reached out, gently brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. "You gave me a reason to forgive myself." The sun slipped behind the hills, casting the world in amber and violet. They didn't speak. They didn't have to. The air between them carried every word that didn't need saying. That night, they sat by the fire. Nita wove a small bracelet of horsehair and turquoise beads. She tied it gently around Abel's wrist as he watched in silence. "So you don't forget," she said. "Forget what?" "That piece can belong to anyone who stops running." Abel looked down at the rough little bracelet. Simple, handmade, beautiful. He smiled. "Then I reckon I'll never take it off." Outside, the wind carried the last breath of summer. Coyotes called from the ridge, not lonely, not fierce, just alive. And when the moon rose over San Simon Valley, its silver light fell across the old oak, catching the words carved into its skin. Home built by two hearts. From a distance, the carving looked like a prayer etched straight into the earth, and long after the desert night swallowed the hills, the wind carried a sound soft as memory. Nita's voice, low and steady, singing the old song her mother once sang by the fire. But this time, it wasn't a song of mourning. It was a song of arrival, of choosing life after ruin, of staying, and those who passed through the valley in the years that followed would speak of that oak. They'd say that if you stood there on a still night, you could hear two voices carried on the wind, one deep and rough as the earth, the other soft as rain, both whispering the same promise. That peace, once found, would never be taken again. Outro for YouTube or narration. If this story stirred something in your heart, if you believe love and peace can still grow from the dust of old wounds, don't forget to like and share it with someone who still believes in second chances. Subscribe for more tales of grit, grace, and impossible love beneath the desert sun. Because out here, every lonely soul still deserves redemption, and every quiet valley hides a story worth remembering.